I might kick it off now. So welcome everybody. My name is Guy Boggs. I'm CEO of the Cooperative Research Centre for Transformations in Mining Economies, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone to today's presentation. Before we get started, I'd just like to note that we are recording today's presentation, and this will be made available online after today's webinar. If you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat. There will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the session, so Jillian will be ready to answer any questions that you may have. Pop questions in as we're going along. We may be able to answer some of them as well in writing, but we'll bring them up at the end of the session. So as part of my introductory remarks, you'll note my wonderful background is a photo I took the week before last when I was in London and had the privilege of participating in the ICMM's Responsible Mining Leadership Forum. And I mention that here because the whole 3 days in that forum was focused on trust in the mining sector and the relationship we have between communities, governments and the industry, and how we break, build and understand trust between mining and broader society. And what is clear from all of these conversations is we know we need more mining. Jillian's going to touch on this in her presentation. We've got a massive energy transition on our doorstep. We've got mining as part of our everyday lifestyles as well. And at the same time, we've got this massive paradigm shift occurring in our global community, looking at values, where nature and the well-being of people are now central to our decision making and the values that we emerge that need to emerge from an industry. Now, given this reset, given the massive mining industry development that we need, this presents a massive opportunity for resetting our relationship of mining with broader society. But recognising this will take not only leadership from the mining sector, but leadership from within our communities and governments. And as we seek to build this new future with the resources that we need, that we recognise that this is a shared future of all. So central to building trust is delivering and having confidence that we can deliver a positive legacy beyond the mine. Beginning with the end in mind is critical to achieving this. And as such, I'm delighted to introduce Jillian D'Urso, our wonderful External Relations and Impact Director at CRC Time, to deliver her presentation. Welcome, Jillian.
Thank you, everyone. And I do have a little bit of a cold left over, so I am a little bit, my voice is a little bit less high-pitched than usual. Thank you so much for taking time to join me today. Before I start, I just wanted to note that this is a bit of an extended version of a presentation that I gave at the Developing Northern Australia conference in July. And the reason that we've decided to present again is because after the presentation, there was a number of council representatives that came up to me and another CRC representative and said this was actually really useful for us and it reflects some of what we've learned over our years. It could be useful for others. I'll also note that usually our Dig Deeper webinars focus on sharing a research report specifically. What we've done here is to look at bringing together some of our own research findings, but information from guidance and a range of other reports and practical experiences and insights that we've heard as a CRC, but also for me that I've heard over my years in the sector and from former focus on social policy. I will just also, and I'll move on to the next slide and then I'll come back to the title. So, of course, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today. I'm coming in from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I've been reflecting a lot on the acknowledgements of country that we give, and I wanted to back up our acknowledgement and commitment with some of the actions that we're taking as a CRC as we strive for genuine inclusion. It's an area we're working on, and I think will always be a work in progress, but we have made important steps this year, and that includes with the First Nations Vet Pathways program, which is looking at understanding at a community level what traditional owners and other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people say they need to engage as equal participants and decision makers on mine closure. We've got our Mass Open online course, which kicks off today or late last night, and includes a module on Indigenous cultural values. We've got stage 1 of the Regional Cumulative Effects Assessment project, and one of the core parts of that was a visit to Canada to learn where they have an established body of practice, and also including lessons from Canadian First Nations and Indigenous people on Indigenous-led assessments. We've got the Latrobe Valley Collaborative Governance Project with strong traditional owner participation, and that's looking to grow and increase during the potential stage 2. And our National Pit Lakes Initiative, which includes a specific module on understanding community and First Nations aspirations for pit lakes, noting that what is possible is often affected by the quality of the water and the legacy that's left. I'll then move on quickly. Most people that know on the call know who we are, but just to recap, we're part of Australia's flagship innovation program, the CRC program, which has been running, I think, for either 32 or 33 years. When you put it in that context, it's hard to believe. Now, I wanted to just say a quick reflection on the title, beginning with the end in mind. I've had mixed feedback to this title. Some people think it's a useful frame for thinking about planning, particularly for the critical minerals opportunity. And others, I've also heard a few whispers that perhaps it appears that I'm trying to understand that it doesn't fully state the complexity of mine closure and the planning that's underway. And I completely understand that. I've been involved in planning for mine closure different levels for about 15 years, so I get that. But what we are trying to do is shift the thinking outside of the sector to communities and regions and governments. You can't go to a conference at the moment and hear about the opportunities that come from critical minerals development and looking at the immediate opportunities that come from the development. What we've also learned, and what is one of the biggest lessons from development of Australia's traditional resources, is it's never too early to start thinking about what's next from a regional, an economic and a social perspective. And I know a lot of work's been done over the years to really leverage the gains, but there's still work that needs to be done, which is why we exist. A quick recap, the critical minerals opportunity, as I said, we're all talking about it. I have heard people that have never spoken to me about mining before start talking to me about the critical minerals opportunity and how important they are for the future. This is a map from a Geoscience Australia publication or Austrade publication recently that just shows the potential. And it is seen as really core of those opportunities that come from the net zero transition in Australia. But as we know, there is also a challenge. Mining does change regions. It does change the dynamics, and it does create a lot of social and economic headwinds, as well as the environmental legacy that comes from what is an extractive industry. There is no one community. Many communities make up an area, and some people can be part of more than one community in a region. And we often talk about community as a geographic location, but as we know, that's often different groups of people that share common characteristics, or it could just be multiple communities within a given region. We know by talking to our partners, and also you can just see by reading the news and what's going on, is that housing, workforce and infrastructure issues are already a major challenge in regional areas, particularly where there is heightened mining activity. The land access and the consultation versus consent, and what that means at different points in time. Then there's benefit sharings with First Nations and regional communities. There's shifting from a participation model, so participation through employment and training, and moving now particularly from a First Nations point of view to equity and ownership. There's also looking at long-term wealth creation and how we, and again, moving from that participation through jobs and jobs, employment and training to how do we build wealth for future generations, and also the sustainability of benefits. How do those opportunities change over time, and how do you avoid reliance? How do you build a diversified economy, especially when there's not a lot of alternate economic options? And also regional cumulative effects. We've often focused on, well, the way the legislation is on site-based effects, and it is hard to look at a regional layer. Many people will be aware of the work previously done on environmental cumulative effects, and I'm really pleased that CRC Time, and through the leadership of Jenny and Renee, are really and our partners, and of course, are really working to understand leading practice more broadly. So what can we learn from the past? This is actually a slide that I put together previously, but I think we can't, but I think the potential impacts of mine closure on communities has really come into the fray, even in the last week, with the announcement that the copper mine and copper smelter in Mount Isa will close over the next few years. I think that's been part of Australia's mining heritage for, well, it's been for so long. So there's the connection we have to it as a country, as well as in a region, as well as the direct economic benefits and jobs that come with that. And there's a few other updates there, examples there. So as a CRC, we like to think that, well, we believe that one of the biggest lessons from development of Australia's traditional minerals is the need to plan and act across mine life at a regional scale for what happens at mining ends. And that's economically, socially, culturally, environmentally, and institutionally. Now I'll just recap what we know about mine closure and transitions. For some people that have been in industry a long time, this will be very familiar to you. And for others that aren't as familiar with the industry or haven't looked at it from that lens of a mine closure practitioner, it may be new or something that you're not as familiar with. We know that mine closure is traditionally seen through the lens of the mining cycle. So it's seen as the end of the mining operation rather than the point of time that it is in a community's life or their broader environmental context, even though those factors are considered as part of mine closure planning. It's a shared responsibility with different groups having different roles, expectations, and responsibilities. And this comes through again from, it's often seen as the focus is on the proponent's responsibilities, when many different parties have different responsibilities for how they share information, how they participate, how they support the regulation, and other aspects. It is more than a return to prior state. There's the economic, social, cultural, and institutional transition that goes on as well. And that's not to say that return to prior state or the environmental stewardship isn't important. It's just saying that there's been a lot of focus on the rehabilitation side, and now we're starting to understand the importance of the broader dimensions as well. And all these dimensions are interconnected. We're also learning through some of our work that environmental stewardship is pivotal, but the focus on return to prior state, and I've got statement as I didn't check it, I was having a bit of a slow day, can narrow the focus and limit consideration of post-mining opportunities. Now, if we look a bit closer into what we know, and also what we know, mines can extend over decades or generations, but those that were originally involved in planning for the end may not be part of the future processes, whether they've moved away or they've passed on, or often companies can go through a number of different owners over the life of an asset. One of the sites I've worked at, I think it went through more than 5 owners over its lifetime, or maybe even 6 now. Governments, communities, and companies change over time, as do their values. And there's really important research that was done as part of the CRC Times Foundation project on regional community values. What's important is they're all locally specific and dynamic. And there's little understanding about what a transition is or how to envision. In closure, some further challenges. It's hard to say, but economic transitions are difficult, even when planned. The focus is on planning, but not always action, and this is one of Guy's favourite lines. Information asymmetry can prevent good engagement and decision-making. for us or for industry or for others, it's what we do, it's what's done every day. But for many other parties, they come in and out of this, out of their other busy lives and also their other commitments and at other points in time. And one of the challenges that we're looking at is how do we help address that information asymmetry so people have access to training and education, but also information that can help them engage at those different points. There's the view that it's only the mine's responsibility and sometimes underestimating the contribution of a mine. And one of the points of feedback that we've heard recently is people don't realise how much something contributes until it's no longer there. And just quickly, mine closure and regional development policy are often disconnected, meaning assets and lands can be tied up. Liability is seen as a cost to industry, and this was one of the key things that came through as when CRC Time was formed, and it's also one of the reasons that we've invested, and I'd just like to acknowledge Kirsty and others that have been involved in the Opportunities for Growth in Australia's Mine Closure Solutions Industry Report, which will be released soon, which will look at thinking about it not as a liability, but as an economic opportunity that can help create new opportunities for a region and broadly. And finally, and this is something I think we'll explore more later, but is understanding the personal grief and loss experienced when a mine closes. People often have intergenerational connections, and it's been a place of family, of pride, and of community. And how can we respect that? And one of the things that, just as a side note, if you are coming to the CRC Times annual forum, we are integrating visits to the art gallery and the Morwell Historical Society to learn a bit more about how the region has been shaped by mining over time, to understand that connection further. So, some questions to ask. We framed these as just simple questions and statements that maybe will prompt some conversations. Again, if you've been in the industry a while, they may seem like obvious, but they're really, if you're not there, they're really important, and we just wanted to make them available. So regions, how can we collaborate for long-term prosperity? Our team has the fortune of working with a range of different regions, and to borrow a term that I heard from someone from the Greater Whitsunday Alliance is, how can you support radical collaboration to support a region in transition? Some of the areas that look, and we've also heard that different leadership models appear in different regions. So how understanding what a leadership model is right for a region, as well as what structures are, will really depend on the region itself. But some things to consider are identifying the capacity drivers for transition. So what are those strengths that can help plan for the future? Again, recognizing different roles, rights, and responsibilities, and this can be interlayered. Bringing together First Nations and broader communities, and I'll refer to a really important report that was put together by the OECD Mining Cities and Regions area a couple of years ago about linking Indigenous communities to regional development. And another important one is think about who is missing from the table. That's often hard to do, and they may change over time, but that's been a core message and theme that we've heard. I've also pulled out, and I will include a link after the presentation, to an area that we hosted our pilot cross-regional knowledge exchange to in July. And we were able to learn about the work of the Greater Whitsunday Alliance and what they're doing to plan for an eventual transition, potentially in decades in the future. They have a really, I think, a really successful model, and we'll share that with you afterwards. Regions. So what regional assets are being created? One of our foundation reports looked at just this, looked at post-mining land uses. And one of the findings that's really stood out to people is that when mines are developed, they don't just create infrastructure for the mine, they create regional assets, from accommodation facilities, transport, water, sewerage, underground mines, telecommunication, and workforce and training. That then leads to a question: what complementary or alternate land uses are possible? Some of the work that's been found some work that's been done has found hundreds of use of post-mining or complementary uses globally, ranging from tourism to biodiversity conservation to energy generation to agriculture to community facilities. But I just wanted to highlight one that's been quite a popular example, and that's the underground physics lab at Stawell in central Victoria. This is an amazing story. Someone put a call out on Facebook. What do you do with a hole under the ground when they found out that the mine was due to close? And somehow got connected with someone in Europe. And many years later, there's now the Southern Hemisphere's only dark matter lab deep underground in the small township of Stawell. And that coincidentally, the mine didn't close for a short time, but has now reopened. So now they have both the operations working alongside each other. And it was installed earlier this year. And what's really is the pride that the community has that they have an underground physics lab alongside a mine and what both bring to the town. We'll share a copy. The presentation includes a link to the post-mining land use report, which provides some further examples as well as a bit of an overview of the international landscape review. The other question is, what knowledge can you build? One of the core questions that we get asked at CRC Time is, how do we find out more about the mining process and also what a mine closure and transitions are? And that's why we're really delighted with our mining, with the support of our mining partners who have allocated a portion of their contribution to CRC Time over 10 years towards the development of a world-first maths open online course on the foundations of mine closure and sustainable transitions. It includes 7 modules that will go over the mine closure, the different aspects of mine closure and transitions. It's fully online. There's 60 hours of content if you want to take on the assessed version, or there's 40 hours for the free version. And we made a deliberate decision as a CRC to progress with an option for training where that was free or low cost and affordable. And that, as I said, either kicked off late. I think the timing was a bit funny with overseas, either late last night or early this morning. So there may be still time if you wish to enroll, and we'll put the information into the chat box now. We've also worked hard as an organisation to make our information much more accessible. And you'll notice that we have 16 fact sheets on our website summarising our projects and including an overarching findings from our foundation program. And we're also building a library of video and other resources. And from our forum this year, we'll trial live animation and illustrations to bring some of our findings to life. For governments, there's just a couple of questions that we think are relevant, or that could be front of mind. How are disconnects between mine closure regulation and regional development policy affecting the future? So how is collaboration being encouraged between different parties? How are the social and economic dimensions, as well as the environmental considerations for mine closure, being considered during regulation, but also in thinking about long-term outcomes from proactive partnerships and investment? What level of risk is acceptable? And what is the opportunity cost of current approaches? Another core question is, how can communities and businesses have better access to relevant and timely information? We know that governments collect a lot of data. How can we, and we're happy to help as a CRC, how can we make that information more readily available to communities in terms of economic impact, in terms of different regulatory requirements that are in place? And what responsibilities and roles do different government agencies have at different points of time? This just clarifies again, in thinking about long-term planning, the importance of a whole of community response that looks into the different roles that different actors have. And these can range from state and Commonwealth parties and of course to local government as well. But understanding how those layers interact, and it will be different in jurisdictions, is really important to thinking about how people can work together. Finally, this is a bit of a plug for the forthcoming release of the Mine Opportunities for Growth in Australia's Mine Closure Solutions Industry Report, which should be released to be confirmed at the end of November. I think one of the objectives of this report is to really understand what the mine closure solutions industry encompasses. And it really does give an amazing overview of just the depth and diversity as well as the opportunity of this sector, which looks at repurposing of infrastructure used for mining, its linkages with the circular economy, and particular interest in reprocessing of waste materials. It will. There's also the potential, in the future, to look at specific opportunities for Indigenous businesses in mine closure and transitions. And we see examples across the country of traditional owner and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses and groups being actively involved in key rehabilitation activities. Another area to think about in terms of the mine closure solutions industry is consultancy and other support for social performance, community engagement, and facilitation activities. Often there's a need for an independent or a trusted knowledge broker to bring together people to find solutions. And finally, how are regional cumulative effects being considered and addressed? We will also, in this presentation, afterwards include a link to the Harry Butler Institute presentation that Dr. Jenny Pope recently gave on some of her findings and insights from her trip to Canada, where I believe she met with 28 people in 9 different cities in Canada to really understand their depth of practice and understand how that can lessons for Australia. And that final report from stage 1, should be available in the new year. The next one is First Nations communities. Important questions are, what are the long-term vision for the community and how does this affect planning? And this goes into many layers. So there's agreement making. ILUA was in section 31, right to negotiate agreements. The wealth generation and management, so benefit management structures. There's a range of different structures that can be used to, lack of a better word, house and build wealth over generations, but they are quite complex, and a lot of work has been, a lot of analysis is now being done or has been done in recent years about how to design good benefits management structures, and it's available in the Indigenous Mining Futures eLibrary link. The long-term employment and business pathways, and I'll just also put a flag out to a recent journal article by Liz Wall and Fiona Haslam Mackenzie on the importance of review of outcome evaluation for land use agreements. Other key questions is, at what points do the decisions need to be made? So there's decisions or consultation that's required during project design and development around how to design a site to minimise impact. Then there's also decisions during operations on landform design, rehabilitation and infrastructure. Then progressive rehabilitation, things that we've seen have involving in selection of plants and those type of activities, and business, as well as how do you support long-term business development and diversification. And finally, how are decisions being documented? So how is the community keeping track of decisions that it's made, as well as decisions that have been made by companies and other parties? And we're starting to see different forms of software being developed. Last point, I spoke too soon, is just wanted to draw your attention to what I think is one of the best reports that's being done on Indigenous economic development in Australia for some time, which is the Linking Indigenous Communities with Regional Development report that was put together by the OECD in partnership with NIAA several years ago. And Professor Peter Yu wrote a really important forward. They had an Indigenous steering group, and there's lots of good lessons there. But the core message is, often we look at Indigenous business development as something separate to regional development or as its own part of it, when in reality that there are often different features to it or different approaches that could be taken. But how do you link it together so there's broader community success and there's those full opportunities taken? Last but not least, I just thought I'd highlight a couple of key considerations for industry. So understand the components of trust. There was some really seminal work done by CSIRO a number of years ago on the components of trust as part of their attitudes towards mining survey, looking at risk versus benefits, procedural and distributional fairness, and the quality of that is really useful. And a pure part of this is the quality. Think about the quality of the relationships, not just the number of interactions. Recognize community engagement and social performance expertise as critical business disciplines. The ICMM has did some really important work several years ago in looking at the maturity of the social performance function and helping companies to understand their current state of maturity and look to work to really embed that as central to how they work. Recognize that individuals have relationships and not companies, and this theme has come through from a number of different speakers in a number of different work. Work is often people change in companies, but community members stay the same. And so they remember the commitments that were made. And one of the challenges for industry is how do you support career progression or people moving between sites or roles or even companies while maintaining continuity. Share data and information as early as possible while making sure it's meaningful and knowing, understandably, that there's some things you can't share because you have materiality concerns, particularly with your shareholders and others, and keep track of commitments. So this can be a lot harder to do than you think, but keeping track of different commitments that were made about different infrastructure and assets can be really useful, particularly for intergenerational projects. And I'm just running out of time, so I'll just quickly note a few others. Considering the long-term management requirement of community and other infrastructure investments, this is something that many people on the call, I can see the names, are very familiar for, but just think about the level of it. Would it be possible for a community organisation to take this over? And if so, what support would be required? Recognise that communities change over time and what matters to them may also change. A really strong point that's come through to us, and for those that were at our 2022 forum, but it's also came up, will remember, as well as at our other events, is recognise the need for cultural healing as well as grief and loss for when a mine closes. So there is the cultural healing that's for traditional owners and custodians that come from the impact that has been occurred on their land and the landscape. And then there's also the grief and loss that come from the end of an operation and what that means for people who've worked there and their connection to the region or the operation and their heritage, and also be part of coordinated planning processes. I just wanted to highlight a couple of interesting examples of community investment initiatives that I've seen and have really been different to a lot, just to highlight something that's on small scale that's led to big impacts. In Mandalay Resources is a small antimony mine in Victoria. It doesn't have a huge budget for community development initiatives, but it does take a really unique approach. And I just wanted to highlight two different examples here. And this is about really radical collaboration and thinking of the longer term opportunities in a region. So several years ago, Mandalay Resources was approached by the community to help them build a childcare centre because there was no childcare centre in what was really a small town but is growing exponentially with the move of people now to regional areas in Victoria. They really wanted funding to build the centre. What Mandalay did as well is worked with the community to set up a community working group and funded a pre-feasibility study into the potential for the town's first youth and family healthcare centre. And this was really important for a number of reasons. People were being prevented from moving to the town because of the lack of access of childcare. And children in the area actually had lower reading and some health levels than in nearby Bendigo. There was also a really big need to want to keep people to stay in the community as they progressed through school. So they managed to, as a community, build the case for the childcare centre. The mine put in a very small amount compared to some others of $100,000 or much more, but they ended up with donated land facilities, support from the Victorian government, the business case to develop it, and they had all the community members, and I actually saw the photos, pitching in to set up what is now a facility for over 60 children. And that has meant that more families can move into the region. They've now moved on to something else, which is turning Heathcote into Australia's first dementia safe town. So looking at how they can get people to age and how they can support people to age in place. And this is leading to some really different and diverse outcomes that for this mine in particular, in terms of its community contribution, they've always had to think about, because they've only ever really had 3 years of mine life remaining. And that's been going on for many years. So they're thinking, well, what can we do as a small mine with a very short mine life left? So it wouldn't be a CRC time presentation without signposting our research and just highlighting a couple of things that are underway. We have the Future Economic Development Pathways for Mining Regions project, which is looking at resilience factors and transition capacity drivers. So that work kicked off earlier this year. And my understanding is the framework and the tools will be piloted in the Bowen Basin and the Pilbara next year. We have mine closure guidance review and comparative analysis underway, initially looking at the Northern Territory, but drawing in lessons from other jurisdictions to really see the state of international and localised guidance and what gaps and opportunities there are for some further materials. The Understanding Regional Cumulative Effects project is heading up to the end of its stage 1, and we'll look to move into stage 2, developing a toolkit earlier in the year. We have work underway on the First Nations vet pathways with community workshops to start soon to really hear from people about what information they need to be equal and active participants. Sure, I'll find some. And then see the note, and then mapping the economic potential of the mine closure solutions industry to launch soon. And of course, the Mass Open online course, as well as our strategic assessment of education and training options with OSMASA. Now, finally, just to recap, plan and act early to strengthen regional resilience, ensure agreements consider what happens after mining ends, recognise that decisions made early and over mine life live what is possible in the future, and recognise the different roles, responsibilities and expectations. And the final point, positive transitions in the future, wherever that may be, and including transitions into mining, are essentially about values, what matters most to people at a given point in time. And I'm happy to take some questions after I get a drink. Thank you.
Standing, Jillian.
Thank you.
So whilst you grab a sip of water, we'll just take a minute. If anyone would like to pop some questions that might have been burning in the back of your mind up into the chat. Otherwise, do you want to kick off with the first question from Daniel Schneider around examples from Indigenous personal and community healing?
Not off the top of my head, no, and that's part of the challenge. This came through really, and I'm sure that they exist, or I hope they exist. I don't have any that I can think of at the top of my head, but what we have heard is that, and really particularly strongly over our work, listening and learning over the last year, I'm sure others know it as well, is that is such an important part of the transition. I have personally heard about ceremonies and community activities that have been undertaken as at different stages of a mine life, particularly where an area is being impacted and it's an area of significance. And I have also heard about different ways that knowledge and tools are captured. So I'm happy, I'll do a bit more of a search and we'll share them through here. I do also note that we are working with we do have a strong relationship with the ARC Centre for Healing Country, which I expect will be looking into those aspects more. Great, thank you for sharing about the Ravensthorpe nickel mine after 18 months. I do recall that happening, and we'll share information about that as part of the pack that we circulate afterwards.
Strong one. Just to the first one, Jillian, perhaps one thing I've noticed in one of the conversations I've had is, there are, the one example perhaps is that the involvement of traditional owners in some of the work at Woodcutters Mine, that the legacy of that from the past activities is quite present still in that community at the moment. So I think to that point of one of the things what we're trying to do is unearth those stories of success. We're looking for exploring, and the flip side of that is the acknowledgement of trauma in many of these communities from past incursions of mining, and so these things go hand in hand. The concept of healing, but as part of that process, one of the things we're hearing more and more, and more comfort within the industry, is acknowledging there is existing trauma from decisions that may have been made 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or more recently within those communities. So yeah, wonderful insights, and we'd be very interested to hear more from other members putting up ideas or examples.
Yeah, so I'll just note one more thing. So we did recently have the privilege of revisiting a rum jungle site in Northern Territory, and that was developed without any traditional owner engagement, and I believe in opposition in very challenging circumstances. And then when it was closed and rehabilitated, I think 40 years ago, some of the rehabilitation was considered best practice, but things learn, change and evolve over time, and now they're needing to do new works. The team there is in its early stages. Has developed a project plan and looking at a 15-year work program to not rehabilitate the area, but also restore environmental and cultural values. And they put a lot of work into that to work with the traditional owners on how to structure. And I know a lot about some of our other partners on how to structure landform design, and even people that work on cruise and Fritz to really respect the culture and also restore and protect some of the areas of cultural importance. And we can share some information that's available with you afterwards, but it will become, I think, an example over time of an approach that can be taken. And yes, I also saw, Dawn, a comment about it is a best practice manual, but what if stakeholders will not respond to a community's call for information? I have been there myself, so I know what that is like. I think a couple of things I would be really interested to explore why they aren't participating. And there's often a reason that people aren't participating, that, and I'm sure you have, but this is mainly perhaps for other people. There's often a reason why, and is it they don't have time, they don't have trust in the process, they see it as something in the future, they see it as their who is doing the engaging, and is there ways that engagement can be also incorporated into other activities that are done in a community, so that people aren't, particularly when there's consultation fatigue, because there's so many people asking for the same, similar or different information, and they're often the same group of stakeholders that have time and inclination to respond. We are seeing with our, I'm happy to send some examples, but particularly I'll just note with the proposal for stage 2 of the Latrobe Valley Collaborative Planning process, they're now looking at working, for example, with youth and integrating, getting feedback as part of a TAFE course or a part of an education course that's underway, working directly with the traditional owner corporations. About the big mining companies. Okay, yep. And then also, yeah, so just keeping that in mind. And also just finally looking at a citizen jury process where people that aren't ordinarily part of consultation processes are able to have time and space to be part of that discussion. By the way, what is key stakeholders? Government's a bit harder. Well, government's hard too, but I think what's important to your boss is important to me. So sometimes it can often be about getting it on the agenda of the right people within a department, and also looking at how to tackle it, how to bring together, make it as efficient as possible for government to provide input. It can be really, there's a lot of a lot of work that needs to be done that we don't often see. So looking at what are the different ways you can get input, and how can that be coordinated? And I'm trying to get through as many questions as I can, so I'll just
Jillian?
leave that one. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a great one. No, I was just happy to help sort of scan the
I'm
chat,
interested
the
in
questions
focusing on
for you a bit.
rehab.
So so there's a question there around social and economic transition, particularly social transition coming into the environmental rehabilitation space. What are your thoughts there on how we better incorporate social and economic transition into these processes, and the regulatory environment in particular, I think?
Yeah, so I think if I kicks back, environment has been part of the regulation for many, because people can see it, and there's been a lot of work done to understand how to measure the impacts and also understanding the ways to improve. So a lot of focus was rightly, I think, been on the environmental side. And you'll often see that, and I've seen in over many years, people's roles are environment and community. So the role of community gets added to the role of an environmental person, and that often works really well. But I think that tells me that we've focused on things that perhaps we can see, and we see as the traditional, the main impacts of mining, which is because it is an extractive nature. A couple of things that I would recommend is, and CSRM has been calling for this for some time, is recognizing social performance and community engagement as a technical discipline. And looking at that, anyone that's been in a presentation with me or tried to talk to me, when someone says, oh, the technical side of the project and the community or social side, I say, no, they're technical as well. And I think it's a shift from a conversation about how do we tell people what we're doing to how do we, where we can, talk to them about the opportunities and really valuing the time and expertise that community and social performance practitioners have. It from a regulatory point of view, my understanding is it's still largely environmental, but there is broader consideration about the social aspects. And I think, again, it's really hard. It can be really hard to measure what that impact and those potential mitigation or strategies are, or potential to improve outcomes. And that's, I think, also why when you look at the E and the S and the G, the S is often less well defined than the E and the G. We know that a lot of work goes into developing plans, impact assessments when mines open, looking at the potential social impacts and how to address those. And I know a lot of companies also do the same work in terms of planning for closure, but perhaps not in the regulatory sense. Yes, and often, so yes, often my understanding is they're not required, or maybe some are, depending on the area, but the focus is predominantly on the environmental. And also in some ways, it just the social and the economic do need to be a shared responsibility, because there's different factors that work together over a point in time.
Jillian, it's a great answer. I might refer also readers to listeners to the report. I think it's in Alex Gardner's report on regulatory environment, but these points of and you raised before, the policy intersection. So as soon as we start to go into transitions, we're seeing policy that relates to regional economic development intersecting with policy that relates to mine closure regulations. So that interface causes some tensions around how an economic or social transition might align. So,
I think,
do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So I think I recall some of the early work. I'm just going to step back a bit. I recall some of the early work that was done on the social aspects of mine closure, as it was called then. And I think we're still learning from a policy point of view about how to look at that. And in some ways, part of the challenge is it always has to be a whole of community response. And there's so many factors that can be beyond the control of the company in terms of how do you structure policy to look at. So I think we're a long way off, Guy, but importantly, it's on the radar, and importantly, I think we're now understanding that the environment has a social component to it as well, because how we perceive the environment is linked to how people see it. So I didn't answer your question, I'm sure, how you would have liked me about how we see the policy area revolving, because I think we don't know yet. And I think it's going to be really hard to get to a point of policy settings either within companies or by governments or others because of the complexity of it. But that doesn't mean we don't need to look at it, because as someone said to me, it's such a clever line, the risk just moves, it doesn't go away. So how do we look at that in a way that's open and exploratory without looking at putting responsibility only onto one party and focus on what the outcome is?
Beautiful, Jillian. A great opportunity for some research.
Nice
And
plug, Guy.
understanding. I thought you'd like that.
There's
So
some
I
more
don't know if we want to
questions
just
in here, Guy, but
Yeah.
I'll send an email afterwards. Yeah.
So that's where I was going to go to. There's just one, last one that I saw pop up, but the examples from Canada around new relationship trusts that support initiatives and communities of interest. And I didn't know if you wanted to touch on perhaps learnings from Canada in particular, perhaps as a jurisdiction.
I think there are different models or different independent brokers, and perhaps not in the same way. And I don't know this particular organisation, maybe I should. But there are different organisations that act as brokers between industry and communities to distribute funding or make investments. One of the challenges is understanding what components make it appropriate for a different region and organisation. And we're also seeing some of the, one that again comes to mind is the Greater Whitsunday Alliance, which brings together 3 local government organisations to advocate and invest in initiatives such as their decarbonisation work, their telecommunication and digital access work. So looking at bringing together as an independent broker different points of view and to really identify what those big challenges are for an area and try to work across those communities. And that's 3 local government areas. So that's quite a different model than I've seen in other places.
Wonderful, Jillian. All right. Well, I think we're on time there. An outstanding presentation. Thank you so much, and a great discussion following up. I hope you all join me in silently clapping and applauding Jillian's presentation. A quick note that the next Dig Deeper webinar will be on the 9th of November, led by Professor Thomas Baumgartel, who will be talking about climate change risks in the way in which we look at vegetation and soil cover designs with a focus on the Latrobe Valley. Sounds like a great presentation. And otherwise, as Jillian's noted, we will be following up on a number of the questions popped in the chat. So if you have any last minute questions, pop them in there and we'll be in touch. But on that note, thank you very much, Jillian. Thank you everyone for joining us, and look forward to our next Dig Deeper webinar. Thank you.